the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
And she will talk about her project where she developed a CBP3 model for Elizabeth Township in Union County. I'll later tell you what CBP3 is. Let's welcome Kaylin Mahoney.
Thank you. So I'll get started. So as Dib said, my name is Kaylin Mahoney, and last year I presented my individual capstone project entitled Stormwater Management Community-Based Public-Private Partnership for Elizabeth, New Jersey. So the project team consisted of myself and Dr. Seth Brown was my mentor. And I am a current student in the Sustainability Management MBA program at Stevens. And as Dib mentioned, I also work full-time as a water resource engineer. And then my mentor for this project was Dr. Seth Brown, who has a PhD in Civil, Environmental, and Infrastructure Engineering. He is also the principal and founder of Storm and Stream Solutions, which focuses on applied research, technical training, engineering services, as well as stormwater funding and financing policy assessments. While working for the National Municipal Stormwater Alliance and the US EPA, Dr. Brown has developed an alternative project delivery approach for green stormwater infrastructure, referred to as a community-based public-private partnership, or CBP3s. He has worked with multiple communities to adopt this approach for low-cost, fast-paced green infrastructure implementation. And I'll discuss this approach more in later slides. So first, a little background on why I chose Elizabeth, New Jersey to focus on. So Elizabeth is an urban municipality located along the Newark Bay in New Jersey, with the Elizabeth River cutting across it. It is one of the oldest municipalities in New Jersey, and like many urban centers, has been home to immigrants since its founding. It's a hub for manufacturing and industrial growth that grew as a result of its proximity to the Newark Bay for shipping. As of 2018, the New Jersey Social Vulnerability Index, which uses US Census data to determine the social vulnerability based on social factors, ranked Elizabeth with a high ranking of vulnerability in most of its neighborhoods. The median household income is $48,000 compared to $82,000 in the rest of New Jersey as of 2018. Nearly 10% of the citizens have a disability, and almost 25% don't have health insurance. The city contains over 250 miles of roads, and the crime rate of Elizabeth is relatively high compared to the rest of New Jersey. Now to get on to a little stormwater management. This map shows the current combined sewer overflow and discharge locations. Elizabeth's stormwater management relies entirely on a combined sewer system, known as CSOs. These systems are frequently overwhelmed due to the increased storm event duration and intensity. When they discharge into the Elizabeth River, the Arthur Kill, and the Newark Bay, the increased volume of stormwater not only overflows these waterways, but increases the concentration of pollutants. In October 2020, the city released its new long-term control plan for its combined sewer system. In this plan, long-term measures are specified to reduce the amount of CSO discharges. This LTCP represents a great opportunity to incorporate green infrastructure and environmental justice considerations into the planning of Elizabeth's stormwater management practices. So I'm sure we all remember when Hurricane Ida hit New Jersey at the end of August 2021. Elizabeth, a coastal city, was severely impacted. People lost their homes and were unable to attend school or work. Several people lost their lives when their houses or cars filled up with rainwater. Many had to relocate to living in a hotel for months on end and faced homelessness when FEMA funding ran out. Citizens of the city continue to this day to seek funding to rebuild their homes. When Hurricane Ida hit New Jersey, it was essentially a 1 in 1,000 year storm event, as at least 8 inches of rain fell within 6 hours. The severity of the increased storm events in an underprivileged urban city leads to high levels of flooding and stormwater runoff. One approach to combat this is through a CBP3. So what exactly is a CBP3? It builds upon the standard P3 partnership that focuses on improving water quality and a community's quality of life. This model allows a municipality and private entity to partner together to provide an alternative for the finance, design, construction, and operation and maintenance of green infrastructure practices. These programs can lessen capital costs while determining long-term maintenance responsibilities and provide economic development back into the community by hiring local companies for the construction and maintenance. By incorporating community revitalization needs with a focus on green infrastructure for stormwater management, a CBP3 model can provide a community with substantial improvements. So now on to my objectives and goals. The goal of this project was to create a CBP3 request for proposal that the City of Elizabeth can then use in the future to provide more green infrastructure at a cost-effective price. My objectives to accomplish this were to determine ideal locations in the city that were in need of redevelopment, specifically those in areas that are constantly flooded due to storm events, and then to get feedback from the city on which locations I should focus on. I provided financing options based on the location, size, and proposed green infrastructure practice that would provide the most stormwater management. So the first step was to determine if there are any grant options. Then to determine if any of the sites meet regulatory compliance for some of the city's goals or requirements for stormwater. Then create concept development plans of proposed green infrastructure sites at around 3 to 4 areas. And in the end, my goal was to provide the city with the RFP so they can move forward with it. The methodology for this project required a fair amount of research into the municipal plans, including city redevelopment plans, online news articles for new and green infrastructure projects or private redevelopment plans, as well as research into the New Jersey stormwater regulations and potential grant funding. This project also required a fair amount of contact with municipal departments and local organizations. The last step was to prepare the financials for potential sources of revenue and funding, along with anticipated financing approaches for the program that can be from both public and private sources. It also included how these sources will be used. The final RFP included an introduction, scope of services section that outlined the purpose, vision, background, program principles, regulatory and other goals, as well as financing dimensions and how it will engage with partners and identify stakeholders. The focus of the green infrastructure concept plans was to select 3 of the most flooded areas in the city for the locations to design green infrastructure practices. After reviewing FEMA plans, brownfield locations, contours, the long-term control plan, municipal stormwater management plan, and other redevelopment plans, as well as consulting with the Elizabeth Engineering Department, 18 locations were narrowed down. The next step was to utilize online sources to narrow these 18 locations down even further. So those sources that I used included NJ GeoWeb, Flood Factor, NJ Flood Mapper, and as well as the Housing Authority of the City of Elizabeth. The 18 sites were able to be narrowed down into 3. These tools allowed me to cross-check the 18 locations against mapping layers for flood zones, future flooding risks, the extent of Hurricane Sandy surge, as well as NJDEP environmental justice overburden communities information. So now on to the results. So based on NJ GeoWeb, none of the locations were near any brownfield sites. 2 of the 18 locations were within a street of a HASTE property, but they were not the highest priority in terms of flood mitigation compared to other sites, so they weren't selected. Each location was considered an overburdened community for its minority population, which was at least 50% minority, but in most cases, they were at least a 90% minority population. The majority of the locations are also considered low-income communities. Some locations have flooding issues already being addressed by current projects overseen by the city's engineering department, so they were eliminated as potential sites for the assessment. The locations that were selected were chosen based on the severity of the factors. Each of the 3 locations selected had at least a moderate flood risk of 3 out of 10 from flood factor. The risk of flooding is calculated as the inundation of 1 centimeter or more during the 500-year storm event. For Elizabeth, New Jersey, a 500-year storm event was recently experienced during Hurricane Ida. The areas were considered high-density residential neighborhoods along 3rd Avenue or within a commercial area near Bridge Street, with important neighborhood businesses as well as nearby schools and health centers. It was important to consider areas where flooding could affect the lives of a significant portion of the residents. Each of the 3 locations was also an overburdened community and was considered low income. The most important selection criteria was that in addition to the factors mentioned above, each site also experienced flooding from Hurricane Sandy. The first location shown on this slide in Table 1 is Bridge Street between Elizabeth Avenue and the Elizabeth River. And I'll show you on the next slide where that's located approximately. And this area is an urban commercial area located adjacent to open space along the Elizabeth River. It is a moderate flood risk, 4 out of 10, and an overburdened community with 92% minority and 68% low income. The area also had significant flooding extent from Hurricane Sandy. Additionally, this location has a CSO discharge point near South Broad Street and Bridge Street, close to the Elizabeth River, and was within a FEMA flood zone A for a 1% annual chance of flooding. After site selection, the locations were reviewed to determine possible GI practices given current land use and property available for construction. So to give you an idea of the area I just discussed, this is the proposed green infrastructure plan at Bridge Street between Elizabeth Avenue and the Elizabeth River site. As you can hopefully see, hopefully it's large enough, there is an open space area owned by the city that I proposed a rain garden in that can be constructed in that grass area. The inflow into the rain garden would drain from nearby Bridge Street into the garden through an inlet or curb cutout. The rain garden was sized based on a maximum of 20% of the drainage area per the U.S. Department of Agricultural Natural Resources Conservation Service. The size of the rain garden was determined to be approximately 5,000 square feet, and the annual runoff captured is estimated to be about 735,000 gallons based upon a calculation including drainage area, annual precipitation, and assuming a 95% contingency. And Table 2 on a later slide will show site locations, impervious area coverage, and proposed GI practice size. So the second 2 locations, 3rd Avenue between Redcliffe Street and Doyle Street, and 3rd Avenue between Erie Street and South 2nd Street are a moderate flood risk in a high density area. Both locations, again, are also overburdened communities due to the high percentage of minority and low-income populations. And the major factor that precipitated the selection of these 2 sites was that they were affected by the extent of flooding during Hurricane Sandy. For the second site at 3rd Avenue between Redcliffe Street and Doyle Street, there's a grass lot that is owned by the Elizabeth Conservancy, Inc., which aims to create a neighborhood garden for families and children to use and learn about their environment and food growth. The proposed GI practice encompasses a rain garden that can be utilized as a community garden, as well for the local residents to grow crops, which aligns with Elizabeth's Conservancy goals. In addition to the garden, a rain barrel or cistern can be used to collect rainwater from the roof of a nearby property. The rainwater can be drained via a pipe connection to the rain barrel, which can then be used to supply additional water to the gardens during low precipitation periods. The third site, located at 3rd Avenue between Erie Street and South 2nd Street, had a low elevation point based on LiDAR data from NOAA. Along the half of Geneva Street closest to 3rd Avenue, I proposed to install 3 stormwater planters along the grass median between the sidewalk and roadway to collect stormwater runoff from the street before it reaches this low point. So here are the proposed GI practices. The Bridge Street site was able to treat approximately 735,000 gallons of runoff annually. And combined, all three of the sites are able to treat approximately 1.9 million gallons of stormwater annually. A generalized method for cost of installation of rain gardens and stormwater planters is $5 per square foot, and the rain barrel cost was averaged from several sources for costs of 5,000 gallon rain barrels. The total cost of all three of these proposed GI practice sites is around $73,000. This cost has the potential to be covered by grants as discussed in the RFP. So here's a continuation of the other green infrastructure practices that I mentioned. And while the CBP3 program is intended to address water quality and quantity on a larger scale, GI practices can also be used to treat localized flooding sources. The assessment of the three locations in the city prove that a significant amount of annual rainfall can be captured from the impervious drainage areas. The 3rd Avenue between Erie Street and South 2nd Street proposed stormwater planter site captures the largest volume of stormwater annually, which is aligned with the CBP3 approach, which aims to maximize designs to treat as much stormwater as possible. The CBP3 RFP provides the city with the tools to find a private entity to build a partnership in order to design and implement GI practices that can address some of Elizabeth's flooding issues, as well as meet some of their water quality requirements of their municipal stormwater permits. The CBP3 RFP was provided to the city last year for them to publish and hopefully receive bids on. So on to limitations. There were some limitations since the online databases and municipal plans are not as current as the most recent storm events. Additionally, some of the sites only had the extent of flooding due to Hurricane Sandy, which was more than 10 years ago now, and we've had other significant storms like that since then, including Hurricane Ida, that may have shown more areas that were flooded or higher flood levels if a model had been available to compare online. Additionally, while I was able to attend a community engagement session for Union County and meet with some of the local organizations, including Groundwork Elizabeth, who are working on environmental education outreach and other GI projects, there weren't many local residents from Elizabeth who attended, and a majority of the discussion was focused on hazardous waste and not flooding like I anticipated. If more time had been available, a recent survey could have been conducted for the GI plans and have provided more accurate elevation for the area. I also would have run a model to ensure the rain gardens would be able to capture the stormwater flow from the streets and infiltrate it. And then for rain gardens, having a planting plan to show which plants are included and where they should be planted could have been beneficial to the city as well. So future work. Down the line, the RFP has the potential to connect the city with bidders who they can build a partnership with to create large-scale stormwater management solutions. Through the CBP3, stormwater management practices, such as GI practices detailed in this assessment, can be implemented throughout the city at a larger scale to reduce flooding and the volume of stormwater runoff. A CBP3 is intended to be a long-term partnership that not only involves design and build, but also operation and maintenance. Therefore, any potential partnership will continue to provide the city with benefits for years to decades after the onset of the program. And it can always be improved upon in terms of goals and how many acres of impervious coverage the city is able to treat. Through the CBP3 and implementation of GI practices, the city could see economic development, flooding and air quality improvement, as well as quality of life improvement for its residents. Once the CBP3 has started, the city and its partners should consider additional GI practices throughout the city where flooding and residents are the most concentrated. Lastly, the sustainability implications include many benefits for the community, such as providing more stormwater management and pollutant removal through green infrastructure practices, driving local economic development and job growth through the redevelopment areas and during construction by using local workers, lessening the strain on aging CSOs, social and health benefits from increased green space in an urban area, and lastly, partnerships between local government and private entities increase the scale and likelihood of success for projects like this. And that's it. I can take questions now or after Shannon.
Yeah, I think that let's hold the questions for the very end.
Okay.
Let's Shannon finish her presentation first, and then they will ask questions to both you and her.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thanks, Kaylin. That was a really nice presentation. I'm hearing it after a year, and I still remember some of these things. One thing that before Shannon starts, did you share this with the Elizabeth Township? And if so, what kind of reaction did you receive?
Yeah, so I sent it to the mayor, who's actually sort of my mom knows from years ago. And he said it was interesting and he was going to pass it along to his engineering department, because they're the ones that are usually in charge of all these GI practices. But I know they had a lot of other practices and projects going on. So I didn't get a chance to follow up and I haven't heard anything.
Okay. Yeah, if they follow up, it's going to benefit a lot,
Yeah.
the township, because the township needs help, that's for sure.
Mhm.
Okay. Now it's Shannon's turn. She will talk about her project where she developed a sustainability framework for the Franciscan Friar Conventual. Shannon?
Hi guys, I'm Shannon Diaz. And as Div said, I created a framework for Friar Minor Conventual, so one sector of the Franciscans of the Catholic Church. And my project advisor for this was Friar Michael Lasky, who has now actually moved on, and he is in Rome, and he's actually in charge of their Justice of the Peace. And I forget the entire acronym that he now has, but he's actually in charge of hopefully being able to promote this a little better throughout the entire church and not just with the Franciscans. And so a little background, we all know the effects of climate change, and we're aware that the IPCC has released the reports since 1990 that state about the impact of CO2 emissions on temperature. And the IPCC has stated that a change in temperature over 2 degrees Celsius will have drastic impacts on both the environment and social aspects of life. Ideally, a global temperature increase of 1.5 will not be realized. However, we are quickly approaching this. This project aims to address the effects of climate change on both the environment and social aspects of humanity, and the need for a concerted effort by all, providing a framework to be used as a guide. So the impacts of climate change will have around the world call for drastic measures from all organizations, all countries, and all communities, and all peoples of faith. So through this project, I will discuss the impacts on the environment and in social constructs first, and how it will help impact those. So for the environmental impacts that we're addressing will include a loss of habitat from overuse of resources, droughts, and storms. Climate change will change the weather patterns, which will create more intense storms and alter rain patterns, creating droughts in some areas and more rainfall and flooding in others, as we're already seeing how the weather patterns in America are changing. Changing weather patterns will also affect the economy, as those areas lose money to lost crops and to damaged infrastructure. Climate change can also lead to sea level rises, causing destruction for coastal areas and islands. New Jersey has 2 coastal cities that are projected to be underwater by the turn of the century. And for low-income areas, this will affect housing, jobs, and create more disparity. So sea level rises will also affect the habitat for marine life and possibly cause extinction of a food source. Increased droughts and floods will lead to a decrease in crops, leading to more food insecurity. And with the change in weather patterns and increased temperature, the availability of clean, fresh water will also decrease. The church was aiming to help impact these environmental factors and help to reduce those, since they have such a large, they have a lot of land throughout, not just the US, but throughout the world. So they're hoping to make some changes that will drastically impact this. From the societal impacts, the climate change will affect the poor and vulnerable more severely than the wealthy. They have less resources to relocate or rebuild after a damaged storm. And as more people migrate into cities, there's more strain on resources such as water, food, and infrastructure. Affordable housing decreases, and there's more homelessness. A loss of jobs, home, and food security leads to more violence, less connection with neighborhoods, and increased conflict. There will be more conflict worldwide for the availability of clean water and of food resources. And as Franciscans, they really help to advocate for the poor, which is where this connection with the church is coming in. Oops. Uh-oh. Anybody know what that means? Let's try again.
Yeah, you can go to the full
Yeah,
screen mode, I guess.
Yeah, I had some bug report that popped up. So as an answer to the
fine.
issue, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. It's all fine now.
Okay. As an answer to the issues of climate, Pope Francis released the Laudato Si, which is their call to action. So Pope Francis stated that the climate change would not only affect those of one faith or of another faith, or those living in one country or another, but rather the entirety of human population. So in the Laudato Si, Pope Francis calls for all people to work together and find a solution for sustainable solutions that would build resiliency for communities. Pope Francis draws on the history of the Catholic Church and the teaching and example of St. Francis of Assisi and St. Bartholomew. St. Francis was loved by all, the Christians and non-Christians, for his love and respect of animals and nature and his dedication to helping the poor and the vulnerable. So Pope Francis calls on all to follow in his teaching and live a more simpler lifestyle and provide for the poor and the vulnerable. And he reflected that the state of the world has come from a lack of respect and an apathy towards finding solutions and greed that has caused a mindset that humans own the earth and it is ours to use in any way. And in order to find ways to provide a more sustainable solution, the behavior and mindset towards the environment and towards our neighbors must change. And the order, sorry about that, if you guys can hear, the Order of Friar Minor Conventual was founded by St. Francis in 1209 by Pope Innocent III. And from the early beginnings, St. Francis led by example. He had a vision that God asked him to repair his church and that had began to crumble. He quit the military and began to repair not just the church, but all these other structures. And as his community saw him do this, they were inspired to assist with the repairs, providing services to the needy and helping the lepers, for example. When he created his order, he stated they would not be allowed to own property and must beg for food. They were to live a simple life, spreading the word of God. And today, the friars follow St. Francis of Assisi's teaching, living a minimal lifestyle and taking care of the poor and the vulnerable. It is from their connection with nature and dedication to providing a more equitable world for all that the friars have embarked on the journey, creating a sustainable framework, connecting the church's influence and teachings with the information of the scientists and providing a pathway for others to follow. This project that I created was to create a sustainability framework, sorry guys, for the Friar Minor Conventual, advancing the Laudato Si and following the Friars' Constitution. Next, an action plan will be created for the friars, providing next steps, and finally an educational model will be created that they can use for seminars and trainings. So in order to create the three products, I had to do extensive research into the Friar Minor Conventual and the Laudato Si so that I could really understand what it was about and relate it back to sustainability measures. And included in that research was background reading on previous frameworks by organizations within the Catholic Church and case studies of projects that were already successful. And finally, after the research, was identifying the top areas of concerns to the Franciscan order and then compiling the resources to provide to the friars. The next was creating the framework and action plan based on the research and the best practices for the industry. And finally, designing an educational model that they can use in order to teach the Catholic organization. The sustainability implications from the project included both regional and global wins. On the environmental side, there were the reduction of greenhouse gases, the reduction of consumption and overuse of resources, the reduction of waste, and the conservation of energy and water. And on the societal side, there was community building, reconnecting with nature, helping the poor and vulnerable, and behavioral changes with the sustainability initiatives. And the big idea is that the toolkit could be adaptable for different organizations, since while they're all friars, they work at a multitude of places, from churches to nursing homes to farms. So it needed to be very adaptable. The purpose of this project was to connect the goals of the Laudato Si action goals that you see on the left with actionable goals for the friars. The actionable goals developed through researching the history of the Franciscans and discussing with Friar Mike his goals would drive the development of the sustainability toolkit for the Franciscans, and hopefully will end up being implemented throughout the church at large. The four main goals that the Franciscans identified were energy, waste, community engagement, and maintenance and operation. So in the toolkit, These goals became categories that were divided into subcategories with actionable steps in a rating system. So I'm going to show you guys what the toolkit ended up looking like. You guys can see that, right?
Yes.
So in the toolkit, I took each of their categories and I divided it down. So I'll just show you guys category 1, which was energy. So we put different things that they could look at: energy audits, retrofitting and upgrading, use of renewable energy, transportation, and new construction. And then next to that, we had the subcategories. And so here is where I gave ideas of what they could do that could help them with those specific topics. And then I subdivided it even further with links to help get them to where they need it to be to find the information. So we're trying to make this as easy as possible for people to come in and to utilize the toolkit. And then we also created a difficulty rating. This was based on the amount of time it would take to do it, the amount of money that was necessary, and how much organization they would need to do. And for that, I did the same thing for each of the different categories were set up here. And they can mark if they end up completing the category there. And then connecting it to the Franciscan mission. The big concern that Friar Mike had was whether or not he could get buy-in. When we're talking about the Franciscans, not all of them understand the language. There's a lot of concern that when you bring in sustainability, that it's going to mean that you're just taking away our coffee cups or you're just going to change the lights. So we wanted them to understand it from the point of view of the Franciscans. So throughout the entire project, I wrote in different quotes, quoting the Franciscan covenant, which showed that we're not asking them to do anything that's not already within the Franciscan model. We're just showing them how they can do that. And then we gave them attainable goals. So things that they could actually accomplish and feel like they were working towards that without it being too overbearing. And we also gave them a lot of case studies. So I went through the church and found where people had set up renewable energy projects in Africa, or where they had set up rain gardens on their premises to show that it is being done, it is possible, and that they could do this project. The biggest hurdle that Friar Mike was having was getting the buy-in. So their next steps now are to take the framework that I created, go through it at their individual communities, and create an action plan, and then reevaluate that year to year to year. I'm going to grab the crying child real quick, and then I'll be right back for questions.
Okay. Looks like.
Okay, do you want to come join us? Okay, we are back for questions.
All right, thanks.
You just wanted to be a part of this.
Exactly. All right, Shannon, that was nice. I still remember the time